the most powerful man in the free world, his presidency crumbling, looked into the camera, his voice heavy with the weight of a nation's disappointment. Are you ready for the real story behind Richard Nixon's dramatic downfall, the one they don't tell you in history class? On August 8, 1974, Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, stood before a sea of cameras and a stunned nation. His strained voice, heavy with what he called personal anguish, delivered words that would echo through history. I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. It wasn't just a speech. It was a surrender, the final act in a scandal that had gripped America for 2 years, tearing at the very fabric of trust between its leaders and its people. For many, it felt like a stunning betrayal, a wound that would take generations to heal. But what really happened to push a powerful president to this ultimate concession? It started much smaller in the dead of night, with a seemingly insignificant break-in that would soon unravel an empire built on secrets. The fuse of Nixon's downfall was lit not in grand halls of power, but in the shadows of a quiet Washington, D.C. night. It was June 17th, 1972, a date that would forever be etched into American memory. 5 men, dressed in business suits and surgical gloves, were caught red-handed inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters, located in the sprawling Watergate hotel complex. They weren't there for petty theft. Their pockets were stuffed with cash, their bags with wiretapping equipment, cameras, and lock-picking tools. These weren't just common criminals. One of them, James McCord, was a former CIA officer and the security coordinator for the Committee to Re-elect the President, or CREEP, as it was infamously known. The others also had shadowy links to the intelligence community and the Republican Party. Their mission: to plant listening devices, photograph documents, and gather intelligence on the Democrats. It seemed at first glance like a clumsy burglary, a botched job by amateur spies. The White House, quick to downplay the incident, dismissed it as a third-rate break-in. President Nixon himself told reporters it was a minor matter. But for those paying close attention, the pieces didn't quite fit. Why would men with such connections be involved in such a mundane crime? The initial dismissal, rather than quelling concerns, sowed the first seeds of suspicion. 2 young reporters at the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, smelled a rat. They began digging, following trails that seemed to lead higher and higher up the political food chain. What began as a seemingly isolated incident in the early hours of a summer morning was about to become the epicenter of a political earthquake, revealing a presidency entangled in a much larger web than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't just a simple break-in. It was the first tremor of a coming catastrophe. The escalation, the cover-up. The moment the 5 burglars were caught, the gears of a massive cover-up began to turn. This wasn't some spontaneous reaction. It was an orchestrated campaign of obstruction and deceit, managed from the highest levels of the Nixon administration. At its heart was the president himself, alongside his closest and most trusted advisors: HR, Bob Haldeman, his chief of staff; John Ehrlichman, his domestic policy advisor; and John Dean, the White House counsel. These men, loyal to Nixon, became architects of a web of deceit designed to shield the presidency from any connection to the Watergate break-in. Their tactics were textbook examples of how to hide a scandal. First, hush money was paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars in secret funds funneled through layers of operatives to keep the burglars and their associates silent. The idea was simple: keep them quiet, and the trail ends there. Next, evidence was destroyed. Documents, memos, and logs that could link the White House to the break-in were shredded, burned, or spirited away. Justice was obstructed. with the FBI's initial investigation hampered by carefully placed roadblocks and misleading information. Nixon, ever the strategist, used the power of his office to lean on various agencies, attempting to steer them away from the truth. The administration worked tirelessly to maintain a facade of presidential authority and innocence. They issued denials, pointed fingers elsewhere, and painted the accusations as politically motivated attacks. For a time, it worked. The public, still largely trusting of the presidency, bought into the official narrative that this was an independent criminal act, separate from the White House. But cracks were beginning to show. Woodward and Bernstein continued their relentless reporting, guided by their anonymous source, Deep Throat, who would later be revealed as FBI Associate Director Mark Felt. Grand juries were convened, judges grew increasingly suspicious, and a few brave individuals within the government started to break ranks, their consciences outweighing their loyalty. The cover-up wasn't just about hiding a crime. It was about protecting a president who believed he was above the law, and that belief would prove to be his ultimate undoing. The truth, like water, would inevitably find a way to leak through the most carefully constructed dam. The real game changer, the smoking gun that would ultimately lead to Nixon's downfall, wasn't a document or a witness, but something far more intimate and incriminating: audio recordings. Unbeknownst to most, President Nixon had installed a sophisticated voice-activated taping system in the Oval Office, the Cabinet Room, and other key locations throughout the White House. He believed these tapes would one day serve as his personal archive, a flawless record of his historic presidency. Instead, they became his undoing. The existence of these secret recordings was revealed to the public during Senate testimony by Alexander Butterfield, a former White House aide, in July 1973. It was a bombshell. Suddenly, the word of the president and his men was not the only account available. There were now objective, albeit secret, records of their private conversations. The revelation sent shockwaves through Washington and across the nation. The Nixon administration's reaction was one of sheer panic and a desperate scramble to control these powerful pieces of evidence. They immediately asserted executive privilege, arguing that the tapes contained sensitive national security information and were crucial to the functioning of the presidency. Therefore, they could not be released. This led to a monumental legal and constitutional battle, pitting the White House against the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, and eventually the Supreme Court. As the pressure mounted, Nixon finally agreed to release some edited transcripts, heavily redacted and carefully curated to minimize damage. But the demand for the actual tapes, unedited, grew louder. Then came the infamous Saturday Night Massacre in October 1973, when Nixon ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson and Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus to fire Special Prosecutor Cox, both of whom refused and resigned in protest. Cox was eventually fired by Solicitor General Robert Bork, sparking a public outcry and further eroding trust in the president. The biggest blow, however, was still to come. The infamous missing 18.5 minutes. After being ordered to turn over specific tapes, the White House revealed that a crucial segment of a conversation between Nixon and Haldeman, just days after the Watergate break-in, had been inexplicably erased. Nixon's secretary, Rosemary Woods, claimed she accidentally erased it while transcribing. The explanation strained credulity to its breaking point. A panel of experts later concluded the erasure was deliberate, involving multiple edits. This deliberate destruction of evidence, coupled with the administration's stonewalling, fueled speculation and suspicion to a fever pitch. The tapes, meant to preserve history, instead revealed a deep, dark secret, turning the president's own voice into the most damning witness against him. With the revelation of the tapes and the persistent stonewalling by the White House, the investigations intensified, taking on an unstoppable momentum. The Senate Watergate committee hearings, televised for the entire nation to see, became a daily drama, exposing the intricate layers of deceit and obstruction. Witness after witness, from former White House counsel John Dean to Attorney General John Mitchell, testified under oath, painting a grim picture of a presidency gone rogue. The mounting evidence against Nixon was no longer circumstantial. It was damning, often spoken by his own former aides and, crucially, captured on his own recordings. The legal noose tightened. Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski, who replaced Cox, continued the pursuit of the tapes, eventually taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court, in a unanimous 8-0 decision in July 1974. United States versus Nixon, the Supreme Court ruled that executive privilege did not apply, and Nixon had to turn over the unedited tapes. There was no longer any legal avenue for resistance. As the scandal escalated, so too did the political pressure. Initially, Nixon had enjoyed strong support from within his own Republican Party. Many believed his denials or simply couldn't conceive of a president engaging in such actions. But as the undeniable truth of the tapes emerged, as the evidence became irrefutable, that support began to erode. Key Republican leaders, who once stood by their president, began to distance themselves. They saw the writing on the wall. Impeachment in the House of Representatives was not just likely, but inevitable. A conviction in the Senate, which required a 2/3 majority, also started to look like a real possibility, especially once the unedited tapes were finally released. The smoking gun tape, recorded just 6 days after the break-in, revealed Nixon directly ordering a cover-up, instructing Haldeman to tell the FBI to back off their investigation, citing national security as a pretext. This tape shattered any remaining pretense of innocence. It proved that Nixon had been involved in the cover-up from the very beginning. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the certainty of impeachment by the House, and the near certainty of conviction and removal from office by the Senate, Richard Nixon made his final agonizing decision. On August 8, 1974, he addressed the nation, his voice betraying the weight of history, and announced his resignation. He left office the next day, becoming the only U.S. president to ever do so. His departure was a moment of profound crisis and catharsis for America. Watergate left an indelible mark, serving as a dark chapter in American history, a stark reminder of the corrosive power of deceit and the vital importance of accountability, even for the most powerful among us. It forever altered the landscape of American politics, reshaping how the public viewed their leaders and strengthening the role of a free press. The story of Nixon's fall is a complex tapestry woven with ambition, paranoia, loyalty, and betrayal. It's a powerful lesson in how the pursuit of power, unchecked by ethical boundaries, can unravel even the highest office. If you want to delve deeper into the complex characters who brought down a presidency, then watch this video next.